We're here to talk about the psychology of sustainable business strategy and kind of introduce our panelists here. First of all, I'm Dustin Wallace. I'm a project manager for Williams. I recently received my MBA from Weber State University, and since then I've been working some with Dr. Sean Hansen on doing some research on psychological trust. And our other panelist, Dr. Sean Hansen, he's an assistant professor of business administration at Weber State University. He teaches leadership and ethics, and he also does a lot of research in strategic management and leadership, and also psychological trust. And also Dr. Matt Morrison, he is a professor of accounting at Weber State University. He's also the director of the MBA program. And kind of to begin with, I was going to introduce a few of the terms that we're going to be using today. And then Sean was going to go over a little bit more about the psychological trust. And to begin with the first term, I was wanting to talk a little bit about what strategic management. And first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what strategy is. And strategy is a high-level plan put together to obtain certain goals with in an unknown environment. And strategic management is defined as involves formulation and implementation of the major goals and initiatives taken by a company's top management on behalf of owners based on consideration of resources and an assessment of the internal and external environment in which the organization competes. So it's kind of a long definition of what strategic management is. But one of the important things about strategic management is that in order to be successful, a business has to put together some type of a strategy. They have to have some type of a plan to be able to be successful. And just because, and even if you do have a really good plan, many times that doesn't mean that your company is going to be successful, just because there's many external factors that can impact it. Such as, one of the biggest ones is probably just luck, but you also have your customers' wants and needs, your employees, and there's other external factors that can impact it. And one of the things about strategy is there's always trade-offs. And this kind of goes into our next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was Porter's generic strategies. And Porter, he says that there are two basic strengths that companies can fall into. You have, this is a little bit more detailed, you have low cost and product uniqueness. So your company can either strive to be the lowest cost, or it can try to differentiate its products a little bit to make the customer want the products. I kind of think about this, Walmart excels at low cost. You don't go there if you want something really fancy or nice or different from your neighbors. But if you want something a little more fancy, you would go to somewhere like Whole Foods or somewhere like that where they have more differentiation, more different products. So that's kind of how I tell the difference a little bit between these two different strategies. So that's Porter's, and a lot of times firms or companies will try to do both. And the problem with trying to do both is you won't do either one of them very well. And so you'll fail, and so usually it's best to try to focus on one of the two and your main strength. And the next term I wanted to talk about was stakeholder management. And a stakeholder is any group or any person or group who can be impacted by the decisions of a firm. And stakeholder management includes identifying the stakeholders, understanding them, and engaging and communicating with them. And stakeholder management becomes really important as a business starts to work and to do business, because the stakeholders can have an impact on the firm's success. And some examples of stakeholders besides the shareholder would be the customers, it could be the distributors, the suppliers, and can also be the society in which the firm interacts, in which they do business. And also any company or any person or group that could be impacted by any pollution or anything else that the firm might put out. And the thing about stakeholder management is not all of the needs or wants of all the stakeholders can always be met. There's always going to be trade-offs, so it's important to determine, which stakeholders they want to satisfy their needs of. And it's very important to identify all your stakeholders, because sometimes the stakeholders you don't identify are the ones that can slow down your project or your plans in the future and can have a bigger impact later on. And considering all the stakeholders can result in lower short-term profits, but over the long term, addressing the stakeholders' needs can result in higher long-term profits and building more of a competitive advantage, which can help the firm in the future. And research has shown that firms that take into account the broader set of interests, including society, can achieve increased financial results. And the next term I want to talk a little bit about is sustainable business. And a sustainable business can be one that is a business that meets the needs of the present without compromising the future. And not compromising the future can include profits, can also include people, and also the planet. And a firm that is sustainable can sometimes be correlated to one that strives to meet the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line is many times when we're looking at evaluating how successful a firm is, we focus on the financial statements. We go to the income statement, we look at the bottom line, and if we look at the net profit, if that's high, we say, oh, this firm's doing great. If it's low, we say this firm's not doing very well. But one of the problems with just looking at the net profit is that this is kind of a backward-looking metric. It's hard to tell how well the firm's going to do by just focusing on what the financial statement says at the bottom. I mean, it could do really well this year and then do poorly the next year. So one of the benefits of the triple bottom line, which is instead of just looking at the net profit, the firm would be evaluated on net profit and also on the impact of people and the planet. So profit, people, and planet would be the three groups that the triple bottom line focuses on, and as shown here, they have different terms. They have social, economic, and environment as kind of the three bottom lines that we're focused on to evaluate how well a firm's doing. And the first two, profits, important to have profits, otherwise your business is going to go out of business, your shareholders will be mad, and you won't have any more owners because they'll take their money somewhere else. So it's important to focus on profit, but also, the people, you need to make sure you have employees, and you need to make sure that society is, happy with the company and not wanting to push them out of business. And the third, the planet, sometimes that's a little bit harder to justify. Why is it important for a firm to focus on the planet and the needs of the planet? And there's lots of reasons why, and a couple of the reasons that I came up with is regulatory reasons. They have to, otherwise they get fined or go to jail. Another reason is limited resources. As they use all the resources that are available, they may not be able to stay in business if they use all their resources. Another reason why they should focus is moral obligation to protect the planet. They feel like that's what they need to do. Good publicity. And one of the reasons I like the best is it can make good financial sense. And I'd like to focus a little bit more on this last one. It makes good financial sense. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, how a firm can be sustainable and also, be profitable. And an example of this is DuPont. At DuPont, a while ago, they set together some goals. They wanted to be a more sustainable company. The problem with DuPont is that they do a lot of chemicals, they make a lot of manufacturing, so the industries that they work in are very energy intensive. They use a lot of energy, and by that, they're probably not a very sustainable company since they use so much energy. What their goals were is they wanted to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 2/3. They wanted to keep their energy use flat, and they wanted to make sure that 10% of their energy use came from sustainable energy sources. And so some of the successes that they had, even though they were small, one of them was that they had the Corian manufacturing plant. Corian is something they use for countertops. They were able to increase the throughput for their manufacturing plant by 10%. And even though 10% is not very much, that 10% resulted in $26 million of more revenue. And on the sustainable side, they were able to produce this this product without having to build any new factories, build any more machinery, or without having any extra people there. So they're able to decrease their impact and increase the amount of material that they're able to produce. And in another example, they're able to decrease the amount of defects they had in some of their medical gowns significantly. And one of the benefits of this was that they were able to produce more gowns with limited, not having to throw away as much material, and also not having to produce as much, use as much energy to produce each gallon. So in the end, they're able to, these are two examples of how they're able to reduce a little bit their impact on the environment, but they're also able to increase their sustainability and lessen their impact on the environment. And even though these weren't great, big, huge initiatives that they put forth, if you multiply these by hundreds, I mean, DuPont's a very large company, they have these little plants everywhere. If they're able to increase, do these type of initiatives at all of their plants, they're greatly able to reduce their impact, and they have a much bigger result in the end. And another reason why it would be important for a firm to focus on sustainability is that it can increase the goodwill of the people around, the society around them. People will notice that, hey, these companies aren't just there to make a bunch of money and screw everyone else, but hey, they're actually there because they care, and this will help increase the trust that that society will have with this company. And Sean will talk a little bit more about psychological trust in his section, and kind of putting all three of these terms together. We talked about stakeholder management, strategic management, and also sustainable business. Putting all three of these together, there's a little bit of overlap between each of them, but as you focus on the triple bottom line, sustainable business, and stakeholders, and put that into your strategic plan, it can help your firm to be more sustainable and also to be profitable in the long term, help reduce the impacts you'd have in the future. And now Sean is going to talk a little bit more about psychological trust and how it can be good for business and also for the environment.
Well, thank you for being here. Dustin did a great job kind of making sure we all speak the same language now, right? We're kind of talking, we're in business mode, right? Business school representative here. I would like to kind of turn this a little bit more into a discussion format now, and even more towards the end. Can I ask you guys, I'm going to come over here, just out of curiosity, business owners in the room? Business owners? 1 or 2, okay? 3 or 4? How about managers, business managers, out of curiosity? Okay. Entrepreneurs, thinking about starting maybe a business? Okay. Boy, lots, okay. And just interested in the topic. Not necessarily, okay. Come here to throw fruit? No. Okay. Yeah, we realize we were coming from a different angle here. This is business, so we're talking think for profit. Okay? I think most panelists would agree with me in that a profit in itself is not inherently evil. Okay, it's how it's obtained and then what you do with it. From that premise, that assumption, we'll continue. Let me ask you guys a question. I want to, and please feel uninhibited. Okay, free association, let it go. What does it take to make money? Especially you business owners, entrepreneurs, but everybody. What, especially from a, if you can think from a psychology standpoint, between people, and really it applies at the organizational level as well. What does it take to make money? What has to happen?
Product or service that people want.
Product or service that people want. Okay. What people want. Okay. Good. What else?
An idea.
An idea. Okay. Oftentimes an idea about a product or service. Okay. Something.
Well, Carmel, if you actually want to make money, you need to have a good profit margin, keep your expenses down, and actually generate profit.
So if you want to make money, you've got to watch costs. Okay?
Yeah.
And that was something that Dustin alluded to in our language, right? In the business language, you've got to have something cool that people want, an idea, and it's got to be a reasonably priced, or somebody else will outsell you, right? Okay,
well, you're going to need a customer that's kind of the combination of that, but it's not only the want, but it's also people are going to need to be willing to give up money for your product.
Willing to give up money, okay. So the perception of kind of a comparative value, right? Okay, together we're looking at value. Okay, okay. So what does this stuff do? You know, somebody mentioned the customer. Let's stick with that stakeholder. What does this stuff do to the mind of the customer that causes them to fork over the money? What does it do?
They weigh that the benefit they're going to get from either the product or service is greater than what they're going to spend on.
Okay, so their assumption, and really it's a belief. It's not necessarily a fact yet, not necessarily.
No, it's their view on it.
It's kind of a leap of faith. You know, and obviously if you've gone to the same company about the same thing for 30 years, it's less of a leap, right? But there is inherently a leap when a customer buys something because they're giving money to you, and they could have given that money to a lot of places, right? That money, most of us don't have it in the supply of cash. So by giving it to you, they just put themselves in a vulnerable situation. Agreed? This becoming vulnerable is, I would argue, the very essence of economic exchange. Okay, and we used the example of a customer, but think about a company's, Dustin talked about the stakeholder management, think about all of a company's stakeholders that have a stake in what the business is doing. Who supplied the raw materials, right? Is there not a relationship between the company and the supplier? Not just the customer, okay? Think about employees. We got the raw supplies from the supplier. The employee turned it into a product that the customer wanted, okay? Without a knowledge of who those key stakeholders are, as Dustin talked about, there's no money for you, and there's no essentially money for the customer. Okay, no gain, no value. Would you guys agree? This is kind of the essence of business. Then, am I putting words in your mouth to say that? This is what has to happen. This can come in the form of investment, a contract, a handshake, a deal, a partnership, right? You have to have two parties sort of becoming vulnerable to each other, really, and exchanging. Okay? The exchange is where the profit comes, the benefit, mutual benefit. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to summarize 60 years of psychological research for you, okay, in 30 seconds. You ready? Okay. Researchers like Rokeach did values research beginning of 20th century. Towards the end, researchers in organizational behavior, they all have kind of come to this. This model, as it stands, was first printed in 1995. Since then, hundreds of studies have been conducted to verify this basic psychological process. Okay, let me explain what it is. If this stands for trust, T for trust, this is risk-taking or exchange, okay, and then the benefits. I use a dollar sign. This is what we're thinking for profit. Okay, so this is similar to what I had on the board a second ago. This gets at the psychology of the process. Okay? The psychology of risk-taking, which again is the essence of business. Okay? So the question is, what can we do to get people to take that risk, to make the investment, to make the deal, to push the economy forward, right? We had just had a huge crash with the banks, and they stopped lending money. Right? Nobody exchanges when there's no money to risk in the first place, right? Without the belief of a return, there's no exchange. Does that make sense? Kind of the psychology of it. Okay, so the question is, if that's the goal, if this is what we want, this is good for everybody, okay? How do we facilitate the process? How do we facilitate the process? This is where the research is interesting. The 3 C's is kind of what I call them, but these in the literature are actually called ability, integrity, and benevolence. Yeah. Capability. I think it's easy to remember this way. Capability, character, and compassion. The 3 C's. Okay, we're talking about, I mean, at the individual level, we're talking about, these are kind of like, what, personality traits? Are you a person of high ability? Are you a person who's compassionate? And are you reliable? Do you have integrity or character, right? As it turns out, these are the 3 things, and let's stick with the individual level for a minute. These are the 3 things that people consider, whether consciously or not, when it comes time to decide whether to take a risk on you, or me, or anyone. Okay. Meta-analytic research has shown that all 3 are important, and that they're distinct. Okay. Meta-analytic means a study of studies. Okay, so a study of 60 years of studies. Okay. Has shown that all 3 are important. Okay. So again, this is psychology. We're getting deep into psychology here, and the psychology of trust between people. Okay. As it turns out, this model holds not just at the individual level, but moving up to the organizational level and even the societal level. This basic model holds at different levels as well. Okay. So, any questions so far? I kind of went through that quickly. I didn't mean to, hope I didn't lose your interest. Let me suggest that to tie in the topics that Dustin talked about, he talked about sustainability, stakeholder management, and strategic management. And let's move to the organizational level here. If your company is perceived by its stakeholders, its various stakeholders, to be trustworthy, you will have a sustainable competitive advantage, and the company's focus will be on building trust with key stakeholders. Okay. So we've heard of stakeholder management. What I'm saying is if companies think in terms of stakeholder trust management, psychology, they will achieve sustainability and profitability. Does that make sense? So a sustainable profitability. And most of you, a lot of you are familiar with the things that Dustin talked about. This is probably the newest, right? This should kind of at least resonate, right? But these 3 things are kind of interesting. What I want to do, let's see, how are we doing on time? Is just kind of focus in on these for just a second here. So we've got capability, character, and compassion. And by the way, in the research, sometimes these were blurry. Sometimes those 2 were blurry. And in terms of, because why do you have character? Maybe because you're compassionate, right? So they're related. They're closely related. Okay, and this is the reputation business has. Business has the reputation of kind of, right? 35% of Americans don't trust business in general. Or excuse me, 35% trust business in general. Okay, so you can do the math there, right? Bad rep. Most strategies ignore this. Okay, this is starting to change. Okay, strategies that focus in on these, and research in psychology is informative. Okay, let me give you a few facts. If this is think of the individual level for a second. If you feel that somebody is compassionate, you will tend to assume they possess the other two. Psychologically. I mean, you just sort of assume that. Have you noticed that? If somebody is compassionate, you assume these. That's not the case the other way with the others. Here's another fact. If somebody that you are relying upon, that you're trusting, if they mess up here, okay, they said they could do it, but it turns out they didn't know how to do it. They just didn't like the skills. Okay? Versus they said they could do it, and they knew they couldn't do it. They were actually lying to benefit themselves. Which one are you going to forgive more readily? Okay, so these breaches in trust are much more serious than a capability breach, right? And this is research in psychology informing us. Okay, so if people manifest compassion, we are likely to assume those two. If people mess up on capability, we tend to be much more forgiving and forgetting. But if they mess up on this, and if we judge that to be the case, then the research so far suggests that we never forget these, never forget that. Isn't that scary? We never forget it. We may say we forgive and do business with them, but we're verifying, we're controlling. Okay. Okay. So, the point I want to make, and this is kind of the what I'd like to discuss more with you. Most business school classes focus on this. What capabilities do we have that allow us to differentiate our product, like Dustin was talking about, at a lower cost, such that we can maximize profitability, right? Gain and hold market share based on our capabilities. Okay? This is new. This whole character stuff, compassion stuff, is beginning to pick up steam. Okay, but let me give you some local examples. Let's go with Ken Garff. Has anybody noticed their marketing strategy of late? What are they doing? Ears. The ears. Yeah. Okay. So the ears. That's one I've seen a lot too. Big ears, us and them. I think small ears, big ears. Okay. And what else?
Is he the one with the sign that says no browbeating or something like that? Yeah.
No what?
No browbeating. Like,
Okay.
I saw that.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen the Pinocchio one too? You know, us and I mean them, the liars, right, and then us. Okay. So, what are they doing? What are they doing with that?
Pretending to be honest.
Pretending to be honest. By the way, I didn't add to this model that I had up a second ago what I call the feedback loop. Okay. If somebody acts honest and you find out they aren't, people are continually readjusting their opinions, right? That's the worst, right? This hypocrisy, right? And that destroys trust. Okay? If this is a fake, they're faking these things. Oh my gosh, right? Is Ken Garff faking it all? Okay?
Yeah.
It's all a ploy. Cynics. Any optimists? No. Here's the thing. What was that? Someone wants to say something? Here's the thing. If you this is kind of interesting. If you look at professions by trustworthiness ranked, where's used car dealers? Yeah, they're down there. They're down their ways. Okay, so here is Ken Garff in an industry with a bad rep. Okay, the stereotypical used car salesman won't listen. So there's the ears. Is doing anything they can to get as much money from you as possible. There's the Pinocchio, right? And then what was the other one?
No browbeating.
No browbeating, right? So pushing you, that's kind of the listening thing and the honest together. The response, Ken Garff's response, I can't differentiate based on capability. Everybody's selling the same cars I am all over the state, right? And across the country. And that market's becoming smaller with these online bidding things you can do now to get the lowest price. But what if I tried to differentiate here? What if I tried to differentiate here? And to Kenyar's credit, these really are part of the company. If employees don't adhere to this, they're gone. Okay, so they actually, at least to some degree, are putting their money where their mouth is, right? And they're differentiating, okay, this is strategic management, they're differentiating based on something other than the cars they're selling. They're differentiating based on trustworthiness. Okay? You guys judge how effective that is, and I know a lot, I kind of see those too, and I go, is everybody else really a liar? Is Tony DeVino a liar? I don't think so. But now Tony, have you noticed what Tony DeVino's doing? He's got, well, at least on Highway 89, he's got a sign that says, what is it? Oh, it's Ben Franklin. Always do the right thing, or always something like that. So but why would he do that? Unless it's working. Something might be working. My mother will change her oil nowhere else because she's been ripped off so many times. She goes to Ken Carter. So I don't know. There's a few data points you guys judge. Okay. Another example, Far's Ice Cream. It's an Ogden-based organization. Decided to give free ice cream to vets. I don't know if you remember this, a few years ago when the soldiers were all coming home. I think it was on Veterans Day or July 4th, something like that. And of course, their profitability just, they filed for bankruptcy. No, they didn't. They actually did really well with that. Something worked there. Something worked. And again, it's going to come back to people think they're sincere, not, well, something worked. Okay? And I happen to know the owners of FARS, and I believe it was sincere. I believe it really was their values that they were sharing. Okay. Okay, those are a couple examples. I wanted to just suggest one more point, and then if we can discuss all the better. I mentioned values just a second ago. How do you avoid being perceived as a hypocrite, right? A lot of you, as soon as you see those signs, are thinking that, right? Hypocrite, right? Corporate social responsibility, whitewashing or greenwashing is fake environmental concern, right? Social, on the social side, you've got possibly this. So what I'm suggesting is if companies don't understand their values and their key stakeholder values, okay? And we're not talking just about customers, but their key stakeholder values, and then focus on what they share, they will be perceived as hypocrites. They will be perceived as lacking this and just going for the money, right? But I would argue that if they do, if they honestly and sincerely think about their values and which ones they share with their key stakeholders, that there is a potential for maximizing long-term profitability. And not just profitability for the organization, but for the rest of the stakeholders as well. Okay, so, so then if you want to apply what we know from psychology to developing a sustainable strategy, it involves understanding values, understanding what values are shared, and then using those to formulate the strategy. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point? Yeah.
I had a question on your, just a little more info on the research, how you said, those three characteristics, and then developing trust is what enables economic exchange. And I was just curious, does research say anything on, does that change at all with financial constraints? I mean, I'm just thinking if someone can only afford the budget brand, I mean, do people have the luxury of trust? I mean, do some customer segments even have that luxury?
Absolutely, yeah. Resource constraint was something Dustin talked about. And this is a general model, right? So obviously constraints are gonna impact it. Another thing too that I didn't talk about is what happens when you have to. What happens? Let's say let's say you philosophically hate Walmart, right? But you've got $5 and you've got to buy shoes for 5 kids, right? you kind of have to do it, right? Or have shoeless kids. You have to make a choice, a trade-off, right? A trade-off of some kind. But, and you know, similarly, whenever if you have to do business with somebody, if you have to do any kind of exchange with somebody you don't really trust, or an organization you don't really trust, but you have to do it, the psychological tendency will be to instill or create some sort of control, regulation, or monitoring technique. Okay, the individual level, the organizational level, the societal level. Right? If you don't trust the president of Iran, you would send spies. If you don't trust another corporation or that you're doing business with, you might send spies. If you don't trust your employee, you put a camera behind their head, right? But the problem with this is this costs money itself, and it can get really expensive, right? So facilitating trust is more money, whereas lack of trust, that shows the lack of trust resulting in less money. Somebody who has to go to Walmart goes if they hate them, right? But in their mind, they're thinking, as soon as I finish my education, watch out, right? I'll have more income. Not only am I going to start going to a place that treats their employees well, I'm picking on Walmart. Maybe they should be picked on, but I'm going to become an activist. It's almost hypocritical, though. I needed you for a while, thank you, but now you're my enemy. Anyhow, that's kind of the psychology of it, though. Other thoughts? Questions? Yeah.
I'd say a good example of that is back in, I believe, the 80s, early 90s, they had generic brand or no-name brand food, and people went to that basically because they couldn't afford the other food until they actually got into it and actually found out that they were being cheated. They were getting less product for their money, but the idea up front was that they were saving money. And so I think there's that happens, but pretty soon they will catch up.
Interesting. I like that perspective. So there's the feedback loop in action, right? I took a risk. I assumed. Now I know I shouldn't have, right? And over time, profitability favors the organization that treats people with integrity, right? And watches out for their interests.
Sean, I'm wondering how sustainability fits into this model. I'm thinking particularly about how multidimensional the stakeholder trust model can be in terms of potential conflicts between different groups of stakeholders. So, you know, you've got a governing entity within a corporation which is going to have a very different bottom line. There may be different sets of expectations in terms of customers, in terms of employees, and in terms of shareholders. And they may have very contradictory goals or expectations. The company may want to be doing something better as employees by cutting corners to save costs. They may be doing things which would violate customers' expectations that they're not going to do the wrong thing, let's say environmentally. So how does the model account for those kinds of contradictions? I think, except, you know, everyone probably expects cynically that there's going to be something like greenwashing, spin, you know, doctoring the brand to make sure, like BP after the Gulf oil spill. We saw this wonderful greenwashing campaign of the, you know, about the Gulf Coast coming to visit. It's so beautiful now.
Sure.
That kind of, how does the model account for those kinds of really inherent conflicts in that situation?
Yeah, you know, I mean, the model is what it is in the sense that this is how trust works, okay? One thing that Dustin talked about was ranking stakeholders, prioritizing. Did you mention that? Okay, maybe I when you think about stakeholder management, you almost have to do this. Who can please everybody? I mean, who can? That's a broad statement. Obviously, it's impossible, right? So they're going to be satisfied, right? You think about, I mean, one of the tools that stakeholder management analysis uses. Maybe some of you've seen this. Is the ranking of stakeholders based on legitimacy, urgency, and power, right? So the definitive stakeholders are the ones that are urgent, legitimate, and powerful. The rest of you can go to heck. No, that's what seems to happen too often, right? is the child living on a river in Africa 6,000 miles from you on your radar, right? Dustin, I know you mentioned this, or anyway, I guess I don't know if you mentioned this, but I want to be careful what I put this up. He knows what he said. If that person is not on your radar, you risk your sustainability. You risk your long-term sustainability. So trust, the process of trust, the psychology of trust suggests that if you want a long-term relationship with those stakeholders, you better have a long list of everybody who's impacted by what you do, right?
So I've taken your class before, and I was going to give it a shot at maybe answering your question. So capacity, character, passion. I like Patagonia, the outdoor.
Good example.
The capacity, they can make anything like anybody else. Their character is, they give 1% of all their profits back to the earth. And their compassion is they tour all their facilities in other countries that manufacture their goods. So that's giving them character both ways and giving them compassion. So I mean, I was assuming that's maybe how you wanted to tie it in. I don't know if I'm answering your question for you, but that's how I kind of tied it together in my head.
I think that's great, great example.
Let me ask everyone, hold up your phones. Okay. Hold them high if it's Apple. Get lots of Apple. Okay. Hold them up if it's another brand, not Apple. I don't even know what they are. Okay. So 2010. I don't know how long you've had your Apple device, but what influenced that decision? Which of the 3 C's influenced your decision to buy an Apple phone?
Capacity.
Right? Right? Low risk. You knew it was a good device, right? That influenced your decision. What if you knew when you bought this in 2010 that their data centers, only 35% of their data centers were powered with renewable sources? Would that influence your decision? You say, I'm not going with Apple, I'm going to go with Google for that reason alone. How about this? Would it influence your decision to know that now 100% of their data centers are powered on renewable sources? Or would that just make you smile as you walk out? Or have no bearing at all?
This might be a biased group, though.
Could be. A lot of Apple devices here.
No,
I guess in my opinion, if they advertised it, if they did something that good, they would advertise it, and that would persuade me. I don't see either company doing that.
Likely not, but in 2011, there was a report that came out from Greenpeace on all the big cloud computing companies. How dirty is your data? Apple was one of the worst. And so they responded quite favorably. Now, how many of you tweet? How many have Twitter accounts? Okay, so the rest of you who don't, you chose not to because they moved their operations center from San Jose, where they had more access to renewable sources, to Salt Lake, where it's more coal-based. That's why you don't tweet, right? Clearly, that's the case.
Maybe that's why you don't tweet. Sounds like it.
I tweet, but I'm not going to now that I know that. Stopped it all.
Speaking of Apple, has anyone seen a documentary with the employees leaping to their deaths? They're working 80 hours a week with sleeping at their desks. Yeah. So there's another piece of information about it. I have an Apple.
Well, let me clarify. I said data centers. Manufacturing, not even close to renewable. Much of their transportation, not, and only about half of their retail stores in the U.S. are powered by renewable.
So I think the point that he's making is the consumer decides, right? And I think you knew that, right? You were hoping. I don't work. Yeah. The consumer decides what happens, right? And the benefit of a conference like this is awareness, right? It's awareness.
I think the consumer decides, but I think, like, I think it was Wesley this morning talked about peer influence. And so if everyone's using Apple, then you feel like you have to do Apple or Levi or whatever the brand happens to be. I think that influences a lot of purchases as well. And brand does.
Group thing phenomenon.
Yeah.
School people do. Yeah. So, does anyone have, I mean, we can talk about whatever you want. We got 5 minutes here. One idea would be if anybody has a business that they're working with, that you want to use as a case study quick, we can brainstorm together on it. Anybody want to try that?
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention long-term profitability and sustainability. So how does this whole model fit into short-term profitability, or what is the relationship here?
Short-term profitability, and I know we talked about this a little bit, but the idea being, I mean, could you be unethical and get a profit in the short term? Absolutely. But what happens in the long term? Feedback loop. People have more information, more time. They learn the truth, right? And what do you do with a company that, like British Petroleum, what do you do with a company that you don't trust anymore? You simply go somewhere else, right?
Is this way of doing business considered more costly?
I think it often is. I think it is. If you're shooting for long-term profitability, your strategy is different. You've got a different strategy, and I think you've got a larger upfront investment, and you know, you have a belief that it's going to happen. Okay? I think Patagonia is an example of a company who became vulnerable by another one would be Panera Cares. You heard of Panera Cares? They had a model. They opened a store just like the rest of Panera. You guys are familiar with Panera? I know they don't have it in Utah, darn it, but there's what's the similar one here? Paradise Bakeries all over. Okay, so what they did is they let the customer decide how much to pay for the product. You come into the bakery, I'll take 2 soufflés and I've got 50 cents. Okay, do you think that business model was profitable for them?
Not in America.
And by the way, I think this was opened up, their first experiment. It was in a rough location, okay, as I recall. Turns out they made a little bit of profit. And as far as I know, they're still going. Now, because, and this is why, they had almost as many people. This is the actual price, the cost. People paid the cost. People who couldn't pay cost. People who paid more than it cost. Because they could pay what you want. I want 2 soufflés, here's $20. I like what you're doing. Right? It turns out they were profitable. Okay? Weren't as profitable as their other stores. But what could happen? What could happen is the word gets out. You almost could have a movement there. Right? This is social entrepreneurship. By the way, if you've heard of social entrepreneurship, this is all it is. It's differentiation by compassion. You're simply doing what Panera Cares and others do. How about instead of just trying to make money, we decide to save the world? Now that's risky. You're right. You better know what you're doing. Apparently Panera did. Anybody else? Yeah.
I just have a quick question. So is this somehow also skewed by location and the environment that the business is in?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We had One World Cafe in Salt Lake with the same model, and it did not work.
Okay, is that right? Wow.
Well, for a short little while, right? It was like 3 years.
May have been other issues with costs, she says.
Yeah.
So
There
there
may have
are
been
capabilities.
other, do you think there were other internal
Maybe a
issues
problem
that
here.
may have affected the profitability?
Maybe there needs to be a deeper research on that. I was told it was lack of profit, and it was hard to keep it open. But I could be incorrect. But I'm just wondering, like, if it's an environment where resources are scarce and people have to sort of get the most for their buck, like, is that an environment where you would want to focus on those perhaps in a different proportion?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to the values thing as well. I erased it, but who are these people? Your customers and your other stakeholders, and who are you? And where can we resonate together? Where can we resonate? Understanding that's critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Critical. Your thoughts? Yeah. Thanks, guys. I think we're kind of there, aren't we? Time-wise, so thanks for your time.